Yes. I'd like to begin first with an apology. You will note that I'm speaking in English, not in Spanish. Though I did study in Argentina and worked in Mexico almost 20 years ago, and I fear the ideas I want to convey to you are too important, frankly, for my now rather broken Spanish to adequately convey them. So please forgive me, but I am going to give the presentation in English, but I'll try to go tranquilo, un poquito despacio, con mi idioma. Before I formally begin, though, I must give sincere thanks to the organizers. They were so kind in reaching out to me, Walter Valdavia in particular, for recommending me for this opportunity, but to Boris and Likey, Gustavo, Pablo, Laura, and the team. You've made this journey so very smooth. Thank you so much. So, to begin, with so many economists in the room, I'm guessing somebody, not Carlos, may have an idea of what this building is. Anyone? Yes, I see a hand. What is it? He even knows the name. Yes, the MC, the main complex of the World Bank, indeed. And this is where I got my start after grad school, and I'm so thrilled to have so many students in the audience at this conference. So it was the year 2000, and there was then a chief scientist for the institution named Robert Watson. Bob, we called him. And Bob was puzzled by the World Bank's track record in supporting science, technology, and innovation. And as a scientist himself, he felt that the contribution that those areas could make to economic development was absolutely clear, but there were some economists in the institution who weren't so convinced. And so I spent 2 years working side by side with Bob to do a retrospective analysis of the World Bank's entire lending portfolio to ask, what did we get? With investments in science, technology, and innovation, was there actually progress? Social, environmental, economic? Did it matter? And to what degree? And so we put forward, with those observations, a brand new strategy for the institution. It was called Strategic Approaches to Science, Technology, and Development. And you'll see it wasn't published until 2003. But it went through to the Board of Governors of the World Bank and got the official stamp of approval that this was to be the new sort of guidance for how the institution would not only think about science, technology, innovation, but how it would make these areas matter for development. And we had a long list of recommendations in that document. Some of them were easier to follow than others, but I want to pull out one of the particular recommendations as an opening for my remarks today. We pointed to the fact that the World Bank, this is a direct quote, needed to become more actively involved in building partnerships. And we recognized further down that these partnerships wouldn't just be with the World Bank and other financial institutions, but with NGOs, with private sector, with civil society, and other institutions engaged in science and technology for development. You know, since that time of writing this document, I've come to learn a lot more about what it takes to construct partnerships, how they matter, when they go wrong, and what they can actually do to drive not only innovation, but economic development solutions. And since 2009, starting the Global Knowledge Initiative, my understanding has increased. And it's with that perspective in mind that I want to offer you some thoughts today. So we'll begin by debunking some innovation myths, because I'm guessing that there are probably some of you in the audience who are still wondering if innovation really is part of the story of economic development, not only in Latin America, but anywhere. So I want to debunk those myths. Two, I want to share a little bit about what this concept of not only innovation, but collaborative innovation means, what some of the research is that supports this concept, and then give you some on-the-ground case studies of our work to see what we've actually learned about making these approaches come to life. I'll close with a little bit of reflection on some of the specific development economic challenges in Bolivia today, with some recommendations as to how collaborative innovation can actually help drive the development agenda here nationally. So with that, let's dive right in. So innovation myths. These myths abound, but I would say that with economists, they might still hold something of a stronghold. And the first is this idea that innovators sometimes are born, they are not bred. Meaning there are special people out there, the Steve Jobs of the world, who are just really good at coming up with the next breakthrough ideas, but then there's the rest of us. And the fact is, we are learning new techniques by the day that help nurture and cultivate in all of us the capability to innovate. Because innovation breaks down to a set of choices and steps that can be learned, habits of mind that can be tested. The second innovation myth is this idea that some places are just better for innovation. I went to school in the heyday of Silicon Valley, when with our degrees, people were starting startups, technology startups. And there was this idea that Silicon Valley could just do it better. And we have so many delegations coming to our back door to figure out what's in the water. Why does it work so well here? And the fact is, I have seen some of the more advanced and truly open approaches to innovation in rural Rwanda than I have in Silicon Valley. It's not just about where you are. It's about the enabling environment, the actors, how they've been supported, and the linkages between them. The third point, and this is one that we fought really hard at the World Bank to try to upend, this idea that in rural contexts specifically, it's better to just import innovation. Don't try to build it. And I think there's a lot of contentious thinking around this idea, but certainly building the basis for a knowledge economy is about setting up a population to undertake innovation of different types. And so the idea that rural contexts are separate from innovation doesn't hold true. And the fourth, and this one I think also still lives, but it's this idea that laboratory research is really the mother of innovation. That there's this linear process. There's white-coated researchers that begin with basic research, then we have applied research, and then people with money come in and commercialize, and innovation has social progress, social benefits. And that linear model was beginning to be debunked 25 years ago, when we were trying to understand the phenomenon that was the Japanese automotive industry. And scholars were puzzled by how it was decimating the American automotive industry at the time. And the linear model didn't explain what was going on. Rather, this idea of a complex system in which actors are moving between institutions where, yes, an enabling environment supported by government is enabling some of the transmission of knowledge through different institutions. That started to tell the story better. In short, this linear model doesn't explain the actual rate and efficacy of innovation in many parts of the world. All right, so before we go any further, it's important to put a definition of innovation on the table, because in your minds you might have a conception that looks more like patentable products, the iPhones of the world. The definition I would offer you is a little more comprehensive. It's really a break from typical practice that unlocks improvements in efficiency or effectiveness. Okay, so when we think about innovation from that perspective, it's not just product innovation. It could be process innovation. Think in agriculture of just-in-time processing, where a farmer who grows maize is bringing it to a mill. That mill is enabling the processing of the maize and distribution channels further through the supply chain for other actors closer to the consumer. Think about market innovation, positioning a product to open up new market potential, or even organizational innovation. And for all four of these, there can be a style of innovation that really puts the needs of society front and center. We call that social innovation. So in short, lots of flavors of innovation, not just product innovation. But there's another way to kind of come at this idea of innovation that I think is really important from an economic perspective. And that's the idea of ambition. So there's some really interesting research. This came out in 2014 from Nagi Hanna and Jeff Tuff at Harvard. And what they were trying to understand is the appetite of firms to innovate. So they looked at more than 200 companies. These are large multinational corporations, and they created a typology of their innovation investment types. And they classified innovation into 3 buckets. Core, so I want to give an example so this makes the most sense. Think of that agriculture firm. Maybe they are tomatoes, they're in tomatoes. And traditionally, and we work a lot in Nigeria right now, so this example comes to mind. In Nigeria, the average agricultural firm working in tomato uses a basket. It's a raffia basket, so it's made of like a reed. And it means you pile up the tomatoes are getting smashed, really high rates of post-harvest loss. If you substitute for that raffia basket a plastic crate, an innovation that exists in some context but would be a new improvement to the process used by that agricultural firm, that is a core innovation. They're still serving their existing customers, so their market hasn't changed, but they have a new product, a new asset that's increasing their productivity, essentially. Then we can go out to that next tier, adjacent innovation. So adjacent innovation is an incremental change that enables supporting a new market with even new products. So think back to that Nigerian tomato firm. It had its plastic crates. Now it introduces stackable, foldable crates and a dolly. What it can do then maybe is rent the crates and the dollies to farmers down the road that are working in a different crop altogether. And so now it's using a rental scheme, so it's opening up a different market, different value chain actors. It's not a dolly company as such, but the dollies and the crates are enabling that entrance. Now let's go to the kind of most aggressive frontier, transformational innovation. So this is the idea where entire new markets are being created. It's not that they already exist, they're being created with wholly new products and assets. When I think about this example of the Nigerian tomato farmer, I think of crates that fly. So you no longer need an aggregation point where all those farmers are bringing their tomatoes and then the next actor in the value chain is moving them forward. This flying crate moves the tomatoes directly from the farmer to the final point of sale. We think that's crazy. That's exactly what Amazon is working on right now with drone-based delivery. So transformational innovation is the stuff that is bold, it's audacious. So how do companies invest in transformational innovation? Well, Nagi Hana and Jeff Tuff found this notion of the golden ratio. So looking across these firms sampled, they discovered that just about 10% of the investment of the firms is going into transformational innovation. See, the vast majority of the investment is going into core. It's trying to find those plastic crates, just doing it a little bit better with maybe some adaptation to existing product or process organizational innovation. And what do you suppose the return on investment is? About the same? Bold answers from the back. Think it looks the same? No, I'm seeing maybe some heads shaking. It's literally the inverse. So in terms of return on investment, 70% of the return on investment to innovation comes to those big bets, the transformational innovation. This is pretty shocking evidence, right? Now, granted, these were large firms. How this plays out in small firms is going to look different. But the question I'm struck by seeing this data is, how do we do it then? How do we make the quest for transformational innovation, which when we think about the challenges, you are all incredibly important to solving, development challenges, be that in water, in health, sanitation, gender, etc. You need transformational innovation. The linear path is too slow. So if that's what we're yearning for, how do we get it? So my organization started doing a lot of research into this to try to figure out where does transformational innovation come from? And some work that we were really inspired by is by a scholar named Frans Johansson. And Frans Johansson was trying to make sense of spikes in innovation activity that happen in organizations or certain cultures. Then he was particularly interested in the Italian Renaissance. And I don't know about you, but when I think of the Italian Renaissance, I think about Michelangelo and Da Vinci and this beautiful explosion of art and science and theology, astronomy. It was an incredibly productive time, right? So all of that didn't just happen by magic. It wasn't just because there was something in the waters of Florence. There was a very powerful family, a very wealthy family, the Medicis. And the Medicis were very interested in seeing what happened when they brought their theologian friends together with their astronomer friends, together with their sculptors and their artists. And so Franz Johansson named this idea of the collision of disciplines and sectors the Medici effect. And so there is now a vein of scholarship to understand how inside of your own organization you can spark the Medici effect. How you could take an entire World Bank project, for example, looking at all of the actors and institutions it touches. How do you spark the Medici effect? And what this research and this sort of exploration points to, it's all about the intersections. It's about creating a space where there is a diversity of ideas and actors, and that they're supported in ways that get this incredible creativity and contribution to problem solving to spark. So what does that? What's the how? And this is sort of getting back to the very beginning of this story. How do we actually make that happen? Well, one of the structures that holds tremendous promise for that Medici effect are networks, right? Now, networks come in a whole lot of flavors. They can be formal, they can be informal, but generally they are groups of actors that are linked in some way, and they're unified around likely a shared value, a shared problem set. Maybe you consider the organization of the economists in this room to be a network, more of a community of practice, perhaps, right? Well, networks, as I said, coming in different flavors, there are types of networks that are really good at solving problems. And part of the reason why that happens, and I've got some notions here. One is that in a network, you can create efficiencies. Efficiencies for both resource sharing and problem solving, so that we avoid the duplication of effort and the gaps in effort, which so often defines development efforts. Second point is that you're presenting to actors an opportunity to collaborate on a shared challenge. I could be really, really serious about tackling the challenge of post-harvest food loss, but I know that alone, I can only tackle a small piece of this. In a well-crafted problem-solving network, one can understand where their piece of the puzzle really exists. A third point, a network, if facilitated well, can help to begin to support the trust that is needed for an actor in one discipline, say economics, to share and convey their idea to an actor in engineering or physics, for whom naturally you would think, you're not going to appreciate my ideas nor understand them. And so we need some facilitation there. Fourth, they really do hold this potential to unlock transformational innovation. Now, all of that on the table, I think it's important to acknowledge that this is not a destiny. Like, not all networks do that. There's actually a lot of risks in networks that we need to be honest about them. So to put some disclaimers on the table, some common failures that happen with networks. One, it can be difficult to get them to convene on shared goals. It can be difficult to navigate relationships and power dynamics between individuals assembled in the network. Mismanagement of resources absolutely happens inside of networks, or can. Failure to maintain communication. There's been a lot of research on the correlation between communication and trust inside of social networks. Those things go very much hand in hand. Weak linkages, poor trust, etc. In short, it's not sort of fait accompli that any network will always pursue and satisfy really ambitious problem-solving targets. But I think what we have learned is there's promise here. And so what I want to take you through now is the specific journey that I've had and the Global Knowledge Initiative has had in trying to help engineer networks that really meet those problem-solving goals. So this is the introduction then to collaborative innovation. Our organization is one that's really built on the sort of DNA of collaborative innovation. What we're trying to do is help share resources and ideas across complex configurations of actors necessary to help that set of actors move from we have a problem, we have ideas, we're testing ideas, we're implementing ideas. So through that entire journey. Our mission then is really to build problem-solving networks, and we do it in a number of ways. One of those is through policy. So we work with national governments that are trying to set up the policy environment conducive to this type of innovation for economic development. We also work on mindset though. You know, for a lot of companies or research organizations or teams, this idea of thinking of yourself as an innovator is totally weird. So helping create that mindset to enable that Medici effect to occur is also something we do. And it looks like a lot of training, frankly. And then we do a fair amount of scholarship into specific tools and methodologies that are being tested and generated in spaces like systems of systems engineering and network theory. Our programs are several. We sort of listed them there briefly for you. But let's get into the stories of what we've then learned about this construct of collaborative innovation. You know, the first is that there are needs that are shared within teams, be they complex teams or small teams, to frame problems in collaborative ways. And I think the case studies will illustrate this a little bit more. But oftentimes, this sort of business as usual approach to this is we bring in some consultants, they do problem analysis, stakeholder analysis, and then we're done. And now we're getting into solution planning. There are different methodologies for problem framing that are not only more collective, but more iterative and therefore more fine-tuned. The second is this idea that users really are central to every step. There's, I would say, a big pendulum shift happening right now in international development, which is toward human-centered design. And that field, human-centered design, existed for a long time, but it's now sort of coming into more of the mainstream with international development. And part of the philosophy of human-centered design is that humans are central, not just to the end when we're sort of testing an idea before we scale it, but at every step of the way, even defining the research questions, which seems like something only experts should do, but there is power in making that collaborative. Third, systems matter. I'm so inspired by the institutions that I see today saying context analysis as we used to do it wasn't contending with the complexity of systems. And I think this is infiltrating economics, the field of economics, but it's also infiltrating core sectors of application of development research, health systems, agricultural systems, the list goes on, but there's a whole field of systems methodology and scrutiny that is incredibly powerful here, and we use a lot of those methods in GKI. The fourth is that the mindset, the tools, the methods, these can all be learned, and I think our fifth big sort of insight is that facilitators, human beings or organizations that are trained on these methodologies are incredibly important for moving them forward. So with those sort of insights, let me walk you through some case studies. So the first relates to a challenge that I think would be familiar in Bolivia, but in the context of Africa, and East Africa in particular, is really, really dire. That's the challenge of post-harvest food loss. So the FAO has a statistic looking across the whole planet, US, Bolivia, China, for all food grown, 30% of food harvested, it's not even produced, but harvested, never makes it to the plate, 30%. You think of the loss of labor, of environmental resources, land. Now, if you're in a value chain like fresh fruits and vegetables, and in a place like Uganda, that can soar as high as 60% post-harvest food loss. So it's a tremendously important challenge. And frankly, in terms of the agricultural expenditure of large institutions, we focused a lot more on production, to the tune of about 90% of global efforts in agriculture focus on the plants producing more. And 10% of the money is focused on this issue of post-harvest food loss. So the Rockefeller Foundation, it's a big institution in the United States, a philanthropic institution, came forward and said, we want to understand post-harvest food loss and whether reducing this 30% average is something we could do in, say, the next 7 years. And we want to start in Africa specifically. So they came to GKI and said, we think to do this, we can't use a traditional technique. We want to try a social innovation lab. Now, social innovation lab is essentially a construct that takes all these tools and methodologies I've been talking about, just brings them all together and helps groups of actors work through them. So here's what we did. The first step was we went around the world, focusing in 9 countries in specific, drawing on researchers, on farmers themselves, on various aggregators, on different actors in the supply chain, different types of research, from plant pathologists, agricultural engineers, to economists, different types of people, and we collectively worked on framing the challenge. And that was really critically important. I'm going to share how many frames on the challenge this process gave us. We then assessed resources. You know, one of the big, I think, contributions this approach of collaborative innovation offers is so much development has already occurred. It's about taking the time to mine those resources, connect them, assess them, validate them, and build on them, not starting from scratch. So we did and trained a team across Africa to do this massive resource categorization effort to say, here's all the stuff we can build upon, let's start there. The third piece we did was to envision solutions. This is before we're sort of in the field or we walk out and say, here's what the project will be. These are teams of actors across Africa building prototypes of different innovations in combination to see what might happen and running them through different simulations to see what the comparative advantages of different options might be and crowdsourcing feedback to them. And then the fourth was actually mobilizing a network. Once we had these prototypes together, turning to Rockefeller and saying, this isn't GKI that can do this, this is this interesting beginning of a network that just needs to be fostered and supported. So through this effort, we generated 590 different versions of the problem of post-harvest food loss. That sounds daunting to anyone thinking about execution. But what those pieces of the problem actually allowed us to develop was a map that connected all of these various pieces of the challenge to one another. And that, in a way, created a roadmap where this agricultural enterprise was able to see their chief concern, their chief challenge connecting to the challenge that was most real for the Minister of Agriculture in another country. And there was a logic that threaded and connected those together. So 590 challenges, 240 participants representing an additional many thousands through 9 countries built this together. 50 integrated innovation solution sets were developed, and very excitingly, the World Bank board agreed to fund some of those innovation solution sets, making a contribution of $130 million for a 7-year initiative. What's really exciting about this is that the World Bank Rockefeller recognized that making this initiative, they call it yield-wise, making yield-wise a success wouldn't work if they said, well, we figured it out, we've got the innovation recipe, the blueprint, now let's just, put the money in the hands of a few organizations and let's go. They said, what we want to do is work to help this network truly become a network and build a shared capacity of collaborative innovation skills. And we've been very proud to help play that role, training people across a multitude of value chains in Africa on these very skills that we're talking about. So that is the story. In terms of what we learned a lot going through that story, but a few of the kind of chief insights from this case study. One is that there's a technique through all of this collaborative innovation that proves incredibly powerful. And it's being explicit about the separation between divergence, coming up with lots of ideas, and convergence, and being thoughtful about who actually acts in both of those respects, the diverging, lots of ideas, the converging. The second is that this documentation of resources was part of what the institution that funded this effort was so excited about. They said, you're telling me that there's already 150 resources plugged into different places and this network could actually connect them all up? Yes, that is an enabler to our thrift and to our ability to get more from our investment. And the third point is that quickly testing the fit between an organization, an innovative solution, and the possible resources that might be in a network, doing that rapidly and iteratively basically saves costs, 2, generates buy-in, and 3, improves the quality of solutions. So this iterative prototyping, I know that's a mouthful, but iterative prototyping as a practice in development, incredibly powerful. So I want to give you one more case study, and this one will be my last before we sort of take this home and talk about how this all might matter in Bolivia. This is a challenge that I'm sharing with my fellow keynote speaker, the cab ride on the way here. This is a challenge in Rwanda that is a very important challenge for that economy. The largest manufactured export of Rwanda is coffee. And coffee is responsible for the vast numbers of Rwandans work in the sector. And in fact, the entire economy is more than 85% smallholder farmers. So the challenge they were experiencing was this strange taste defect, where sometimes, once the buyers of coffee were roasting it, it would smell like rotten potatoes. They called this the potato taste challenge because it was smelling like potatoes. So a team of scientists had been trying to figure out why. Why is this happening to our coffee? Is it something happening to the plant? Is this an insect? Is it something happening with our method of processing coffee before export? Is it how we're drying it? What is going wrong? Well, there was a challenge in that government was very, very concerned about talking about this challenge at all. They thought if we talk about it, it'll scare away buyers. Meanwhile, coffee buyers were saying, we know this is a challenge, and we don't think anyone's doing anything about it. So at that point, GKI was invited to come in, and we were invited to come in by the scientists. They said, we want a network. We want a network with whomever, chemists, plant pathologists that can help us do this, but we want to see this actually be meaningful for farmers. So we want to work with farmers too. So we came in, and we first trained up that original team on how to do a systems analysis of Rwanda. They weren't hiring us as consultants. We were helping them with a sort of recipe, an approach for collaborative innovation. So we gave them this approach for innovation systems analysis and trained them up with a set of skills to facilitate their own network. The second point was we helped them, this growing team, conceptualize what kind of solutions would work. Because of course the scientists wanted to just understand the phenomenon. But viewed from the perspective of, say, the Minister of Agriculture, they wanted to know that the value of their manufactured export was going to increase, and that buyers weren't going to leave and go buy Kenyan coffee or Tanzanian coffee, Bolivian coffee. And then we helped nurture the network, which is to say that we work to identify additional actors over time to see that all the pieces of this problem, the Rwandan Coffee Challenge, have representation. So what came out of this? Over 30 organizations ultimately came together. They straddled 4 continents. We have a prototype technology being used. It uses UV light. Scientists have conclusively determined what caused this challenge, and spoiler alert, it is an insect named the intesti above. We have several tens of thousands of farmers using a different kind of enhanced agronomic practice that prevents the intesti above from causing damage to their crop, which has all kinds of other benefits. So it's been a pretty amazing journey, and this journey was I think also responsible for unleashing now $5 million of investment for USAID that has come in and said, this is working so well, we want to see this happen in the Democratic Republic of Congo and in Burundi. So the story has continued. In terms of what we've learned, again, so many lessons in this kind of work. The first is that the systems mapping is incredibly powerful, and that by empowering a team on the ground to do it for themselves, they uncovered insights about the Rwandan agricultural innovation system that we never would have seen. The second is that this training on skills on an as-needed basis, meaning once the policy community came in and this network had been moving along for a couple of years, we needed to pause, train the policy community on some of these network skills, and keep going together. So the training wasn't just one and done, It was iterative training as well that mapped to the network. And third, this, again, coming back to the facilitators, that the facilitators really are what makes or breaks the network. So, what does it all mean here? What might any of this do for you here in Bolivia? I'm going to close with just 3 slides that I think can kind of offer some invitations to each of you, the future and the present stars of economics here in this country. I did a little bit of research before coming here, looking into some of the specific development challenges still very real for Bolivia, despite some incredible social, economic, and environmental progress over the last decades. And 3 key points came out. The first is this challenge to increase productivity growth, that the contribution of the informal sector is still very large, but also, and this was even at the level of specific crop profiles, when you look at issues like agricultural productivity, the productivity per hectare of land here compared to, say, Paraguay, Argentina, Brazil, it is different, it is lower. And so there's a productivity question that I think will totally be satisfied with collaborative innovation, but it is a place to look. The second area of challenge where I think collaborative innovation would be potentially very meaningful here is around reducing sustainability risks. I was shocked to learn how vulnerable Bolivia is by comparison to any other country in Latin America to extreme weather events, be those droughts, flash floods, extreme rainfall, and that is all exacerbated further by climate change. So reducing sustainability risks that are so cross-cutting to so many sectors, there's no way but a collaborative approach to doing that. And the third is sort of an investigation into what the innovation capacity is of Bolivia today. And one of the ways to benchmark that, and it's crude, but it is an index built by INSEAD in France and others, and it's called the Global Innovation Index. On that index, Bolivia ranks 106th out of 126 countries listed. Now, this index, it scores on about 70 indicators, and they cluster into 7 buckets. You'll see them here. Business sophistication, market sophistication, infrastructure, institutions, human capital, and research. And on the output side, it's looking at knowledge and technology outputs and creative outputs. So when I was sort of analyzing where Bolivia fell on these indicators, what caught my attention was the blue slice there, business sophistication. And if you unpack the indicator story of Bolivia, you see that the country ranks 125th out of 126 on linkages, on this very collaborative innovation issue, and it is meaningful. It's meaningful for technology outputs, for reducing the sustainability risks, for increasing productivity. Further, it speaks to the opportunity, I think, for cluster development, clusters that emerge around the challenges that are driving the future productivity, environmental, social sustainability of this country. In short, I think part of the story of where Bolivia can and may wish to look for its future really links to collaborative innovation. And so with that, I think these 5 recommendations are what I would like to leave you with in terms of how you can really think about moving this forward. I've spoken in these case studies about what problem framing can do to help not only unify actors, but frankly, reestablish what's the solution or what's the problem we're actually trying to solve here. Is it really increased productivity, or is it in effect social inclusion and identity, all these sub-challenges? If we use problem framing, we get a texture and nuance that we don't see otherwise. The second is, again, a point I've made around facilitators. You know, we do facilitator training, and I'm often in rooms with people that would never call themselves a facilitator. They would say, well, I'm an economist, and my work is to try to bring together data sets around this particular issue in agriculture. Well, in effect, you are a facilitator. You didn't think of yourself as one. But there are specific skills that can be learned to take those involved and invested in the various critical skill areas, critical sectors here in Bolivia, and give them these skills. Let them wear the mantle of facilitator and see what that does to start to promote and strengthen these linkages. Third recommendation, aligning the incentives to maximize resource sharing. I'm not familiar with your national policies on innovation specifically, but I would be curious to see what kind of space the enabling environment is offering in terms of this resource identification, partnership formation, and incentives to do that. Fourth, deepening the collaborative innovation skills. We're here on a university campus, a bastion of training, but it doesn't just need to be within universities. I think for Bolivian firms, consortia, networks, this commitment to skill building is something that I would strongly encourage on the specific skill sets that relate to collaboration, innovation, and systems. And the fourth is, you're not alone. In Latin America, there's something called LACIN, the Latin America Social Innovation Network. Connect to those in your community, in this part of the world that are driving forward social innovation so that those benefits, those stories and those case studies can be brought here, brought home. So I'll leave you with some last thoughts, and that is this, that when each step of the journey from problem to solution is collaborative, innovation solutions, never thought possible, become realizable. So collaborative innovation truly recognizes our common, our shared fate, and empowers us all to actively innovate the future that we seek to see unfold. Thank you.